Well, we're on the road again, this time along the banks of the Boise River, close to the capital city. You know, areas like this along the riverbank flourish with plant life. Willows, cottonwoods, shrubs hug the banks and actually draw their sustenance from the river itself. Riverbanks like this, known as riparian zones, are classified as wetlands, very important ones in the arid West. But whether they're bogs or marshes or swamps, they all have one thing in common: an abundance of wildlife. We're just beginning to become aware of the value of our wetlands. For years, with the government's blessing, America has systematically eliminated a precious resource until less than half of the country's original wetlands remain.
In the past, people did use wetlands as places to dump their old refrigerator and their toilets and to fill, and they were considered wasteland. But I think today people are really changing, and they realize after we've lost 50% of our wetlands that these areas are important for a lot of functions, and they're beautiful places to go wandering in and to see a lot of different birds and animals.
The federal government has caught up with the trend, instituting a no net loss wetland policy that evolved as a result of a campaign promise in the 1988 election run. But despite the federal policy, we're still experiencing wetland loss in the United States at the rate of an acre a minute. In Idaho, of the estimated 95,140 acres that remain, about 380 are lost each year.
You don't see huge wetland losses occurring today in as far as 1,000 acres like you did back in the 50s, 70s. But the losses we have today are incremental bits and pieces.
Marshes such as Gray's Lake National Wildlife Refuge, Harriman State Park, Centennial Marsh, and the Kootenai National Wildlife Refuge are the traditional image of a wetland. But the most vulnerable are the less obvious ones. The places where most of the losses occur are the thin green lines that wind through the high deserts of Idaho.
This particular riparian zone along Cottonwood Creek here in Boise is fairly typical of a lot of the Intermountain West. It's a narrow strip of relatively lush vegetation surrounded by an arid upland.
There are three components to every wetland. The main element, of course, is water. This drives the other two: hydric soils and the water-loving plants that flourish in this earth. These thin green lines are the lifeblood of Idaho's desert wildlife.
Just because they're small does not mean they're not important. The detritus from the vegetation breaking down starts the food chain, then there's a layer of insects, and then there's a layer of birds and fish, and it just moves right up the food chain. It's very important.
In the winter, these areas also provide protection or cover for prairie birds, such as sharp-tailed grouse.
There's a whole host of wildlife species, including a lot of the wading birds and ducks that just wouldn't be in this part of the world if there wasn't wetlands.
Wetlands in Idaho are critical as summer breeding areas. Ducks, geese, and the world's largest nesting concentration of greater sandhill cranes build their nests among the bulrushes and cattails at Gray's Lake.
If you go to one of those areas in eastern Idaho where you have those sandhill cranes, and the beautiful, beautiful sound they make is just one of the most wonderful experiences that you can have.
Wetlands also serve as important stopover points for migrating waterfowl. Each spring, Mud Lake in eastern Idaho becomes a temporary oasis for thousands of snow geese as they journey to nesting grounds further north. The benefits for wildlife are easy to see, but wetlands have a far more subtle role.
All wetlands, including these drier areas plus the very wet marshlands and boggy areas that are saturated throughout the year, are really important for flood control. They've served quite a useful purpose in certain areas to filter out pollutants.
At Fort Boise Wildlife Management Area, there are 5 ponds standing between the drain water from farmers' fields and the Snake River.
The wetland just acts like a big filter system. The silt settles out when the water slows down, and the plants use a lot of the excess nutrients. Every wetland improves water quality.
At Fort Boise, manager Claire Kofed is reversing the trend of wetlands loss. By next summer, this field, recently purchased by the Fish and Game Commission, will be well on its way to looking like this one nearby, another man-made wetland.
We started a wetland in eastern Idaho, and we're pumping into a natural basin over there, and within hours we had ducks and geese and even some swans on it, so they really respond to that sort of thing.
The movie Field of Dreams said, "If you build it, they will come. But that takes money." One of the most important contributors to wetland restoration is the hunter.
It's amazing how people like myself that enjoy wetlands and waterfowl want to protect these kinds of environments, and they see them as a precious resource, and once they're lost, they'll never be regained.
Each waterfowl hunter must purchase a federal duck stamp. These monies are used to improve wetlands in the United States. In Idaho, hunters are also required to buy a state duck stamp to finance a fish and game program called HIP, Habitat Improvement Program. The program helps landowners on a cost-share basis develop ponds and build nesting islands. Since 1987, when the program was initiated, $1.2 million has been spent acquiring land and improving waterfowl habitat in Idaho. But most of our duck population nests in Canada, where 5 years of drought have taken a drastic toll on breeding areas. Mallard numbers have dropped from a high of 12 million to 6 million in North America. To fill the gap, a private conservation group made up of waterfowl hunters, Ducks Unlimited, collects almost $68 million annually to improve nesting marshlands.
We're striving to build those populations to good sustainable numbers. The problem, as usual with most wildlife, is the loss of critical habitat. And for waterfowl, that's wetlands.
Wetlands, a long neglected part of the puzzle that nurtures our world, a refuge for wildlife, and in some ways, a refuge for man.
I like just being here. I like to feel this wind in my face and see birds in the sky. So the wetland environment to me is something I would hate to live without.